So we have a little under an hour, about 55 minutes or so, and I think we just want to use this time to reflect back on the past year. I think this past year is our first time kind of organizing ourselves in what we call working groups on a couple of topics. Kind of maybe use half of our time to reflect back on how that went, and then the second half of our time to talk about what do we want to take that forward into next year, expanding, contracting, how we want to continue to work effectively together. So that is the general plan for the next 55 minutes or so. Let me share my screen. Is that coming through for everyone? All right, I see some thumbs up. So in the first half in reflection, Jake sent out a note to all those individuals that last time we did this had been identified as a lead for a working group. So you have a little bit of heads up, but we've got a hopefully a pretty simple set of questions we wanted each lead to touch on, and then anyone else could add further comments on it. But we just wanted people to reflect back on their working groups, what they thought went well about those groups. What didn't go well. I think we can be completely open and honest that sometimes it's not going to far from perfect, and we should be okay airing things that we thought didn't work. And if there's something that comes to mind of what you think you would want to change going forward into next year. So I'm going to see if Nathan doesn't mind if I put him on the spot to go first to talk about the Climate Change Advocacy Solutions Working Group.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Sounds great.
Cool. Good morning, all. I did take a look at Jake's prompts here, and but I would also invite anyone else on that group to jump in if they want to add any particular details or things that I forget. So just skimming over my notes here. What went well? I think we had really great conversations. We've had probably half a dozen of them or something like that, maybe a little bit more since last winter. And I think what I appreciated was the quality of the conversation. We ended up kind of circling around a bunch of different ideas related to what climate advocacy means, what it should look like, what our roles are in doing it, and what are some possible pathways that we might take in order to pursue that's just part of the problem. What would we be pursuing? Are we pursuing particular goals? Are we pursuing the idea of more commitments? Are we asking anything, special of our particular administrations? We're trying to come up with some kind of grand system-wide statement. So we had really great conversations, and we kept having trouble with what is actually the purpose of this group. I think climate action in general is hard as well, and as I've implied, part of the struggle has been what can we do as members of a state institution who are not all of us the deciders either. So among other things, we considered pursuing curricular options, trying to think about training for faculty members, supplying, if there was a need for them, sample syllabi that instructors could use, because we thought, well, if we can't make big top-down changes, maybe we should be working kind of from the ground up through the educational enterprise. And for a variety of reasons, we decided that was a complicated way to go about it. There's curricular committees, there's faculty training groups, and so on. And there's a lot of reasons why faculty can and cannot pursue different kinds of topics. And so we ultimately kind of came around to saying the advocacy that we're doing with Maria Redmond at the state level is the kind of climate advocacy in a sense. The recommendations document that many of us worked on quite strenuously and passed up to the Climate Change Task Force, that itself was a kind of climate advocacy. And maybe that's some of the things that we really should be doing. Now, you could call that a cop-out because it means we're basically said, oh, well, this group we don't need to do anything in this group because we're already doing it. But that's kind of where we left it, was the question of, is this type of conversation we're having already the one that we need to be having with climate? And so where we thought we might have a breakout session today on this working group, we ultimately decided we weren't kind of ready for that yet. So I think kind of in conclusion, it is open to discussion what the future of this working group is, and whether it needs to be its own working group or whether we just want to make sure we bear in mind the rather obvious thing that we want climate action across system and in the state. Did I miss anything, rest of the team?
Awesome. Looks like you nailed it, Nathan.
Well, I'm sure others will improve on that, but at least you got the basic info.
All right, great. Well, I'm going to keep going down this list and see if Amy wouldn't mind starting the reflections on the energy benchmarking working group. Did we lose Amy?
I was going to say, I don't see her on the call.
And she said she had her internet troubles. We'll see if she joins us, and we'll ask her again. Otherwise, I know there's a few other of us who could probably reflect on that. So we'll take a pause there, and that means Dave, you're up on the staffing team.
Oh no, the pressure. Yeah, so what went well? I think we had a lot of meetings. And I think the consistency of those was a real benefit. We went through some fits and starts as it related to the year and dealing with COVID. But I think we were a pretty committed group of people working on the process of trying to figure that out. I think we had a good collaborative nature to our process. So we worked on a number of different documents. What went well sort of ties into what didn't, and I think it's a similar theme to what Nathan expressed in the climate advocacy is like really trying to figure out a pathway forward. I think we looked at different approaches to how to craft this position, from sort of starting with a full PD to then looking more at a sort of argumentative case in terms of why this position should be there, and then also sort of trying to figure out like, okay, well, who is this really going to? Should we be sending this to the Board of Regents? Should we be sending it directly to Tommy Thompson? And then we got into this quandary too about, well, maybe we shouldn't be making the case at all, and maybe it should be coming from somebody else to sort of present to Tommy Thompson, like Maria Redmond out in the sustainability office, and sort of saying like, okay, well, this is a sort of position we're going to need across the state in all sort of areas, and sort of using her roadmap design from the Climate Change Task Force as a way to sort of advocate for that. And so I think because of that, you saw us go through a couple of iterations about how to approach the position. And then I think we also sort of had some justifiable, what I would say is justifiable hesitation about trying to push forward because of what is going on with COVID and the downgrading of positions in UW system and the budget cuts and whatever else. So I think we are trying to sort of assess the environment, and I think that gave us a little bit of analysis paralysis in terms of like, all right, how do we drop this bomb and who do we drop it on? And then, so I think that's sort of what didn't go well, just some of that hemming and hawing about like, well, what is really the best way to do this? And so we're still continuing to meet, which I think is great. Most recently, we actually were able to get a nice hour-long conversation with the director of system sustainability for the University of California system. And so that was really good just to sort of hear from him on sort of how his position came to be and sort of how it's evolved since then, and gave us some sort of different perspectives about how we might approach it. And we actually have a meeting set up for next week to sort of continue down that process. What would we change for next year? Clear system leadership, so we know who we should direct this to. And I think not having COVID would probably be our two top things we change for next year. So, but I think that's generally it. It was a good group. We were able to meet and really, I think, move this idea forward in a productive way. but we definitely still have ground to cover. And that's about it. And if anybody else from that committee wants to chime in, there you go.
Anyone else want to add to what Dave discussed?
So I'll just ask the question, I guess. Is this worth continuing? Or should we pause it for a year?
I mean, from my end, my perspective, we should continue. I don't see any reason to not. I think the talking to the system director out in California was pretty insightful, and I think has given us probably some new perspectives on how we approach it. And I think I'm still a believer, like, there's no time like the present, right? So like, we have to keep pushing regardless of what's going on. Like, we can't just be backtracking, so or hanging out. So I would say yes to continue to try and figure out the best way to move it forward. I'm not sure what the rest of the team thinks. Some of those folks are on the call, so Kate, Nathan, Rex, you can all weigh in.
I would agree with Dave. We've laid a lot of really good foundation, and what we spent the most time on was articulating our argument, and we have a very solid footing on that. I also want to mention, because there was this opening to share your thoughts with Tommy Thompson, we also used, I guess it was really primarily this group, but others in our ask of system and sustainability also went forward. We know that someone from Tommy Thompson's office did reach out to Maria, so perhaps having shared this need with her and the thought that perhaps all agencies of the state need a sustainability director. So we've been really laying the seeds and laying some really good groundwork. So while this might not be, we're not just going to make some big ask, we feel like we're being careful and thoughtful with how we do it, and we're ready to meet with anyone who wants to discuss this. And I think this group, having shared so many conversations, like, we feel very primed and ready to keep this moving. It's just not one direct ask.
I mean, in a sense, it's kind of like the usual fight where we're justifying our existence. Those same arguments are used on our individual campuses in some ways. So yeah, I guess, just kind of playing the devil's advocate role as far as the budget and staffing piece goes. I'm trying to think if there's any other models besides like kind of a full-time coordinator. I think we had talked about release time or rotation, like additional funding to someone, like at a particular campus to coordinate more on our behalf, something like that. Is that anything you guys have talked about?
Go ahead,
sorry,
Kate.
go ahead, Dave. I just want to say, I think we always felt that as we approached system, Rob Kramer was an encouraging one that we could talk to. He had a really good rapport with Amy at Platteville. The interesting thing is that he is now Missy's boss. And so again, like, no one to hold them, one to fold them. Let's sort of see how he plays out in that role in Madison. And that might be very helpful in understanding how system works. I think that, if there's space for Madison to have that conversation with him, he could probably be a very good mentor on this.
That's a great point, Kate. We haven't had a chance to meet him, or I haven't yet, but I think that will be coming up soon.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I would almost look at Madison's office basically serving in that role this last year in a lot of ways, just with the way they've coordinated working groups. And I mean, I know the working groups that I sat on, we would have been a lot more lost without the help that we had from the Madison teammates to keep us organized and moving forward, meetings on the schedule, like a lot of that kind of stuff I think is really important to keep us on track. And without that kind of guidance, it's a little bit easier to drift off to our own little islands. So I think there's a value to it. It's just kind of, like I said, it's kind of evaluating what the model looks like that's more feasible than a new position.
And to be honest, I think, Wes, we did look at some of the, return on investment scenarios from the position as it relates to efficiency. And I think those are there and can be justified, quite honestly. I think really part of this is figuring out what is the best inroad into the leadership that's going to make the decision, and who has the ability to, really do that, and how do we best position ourselves. I think there's been a lot of time spent talking about strategy, and really sort of figuring out, like, okay, rather than just sending an email to Tommy and being like, here, hire this position, really trying to figure out how do we work this in a way where it's going to get heard and listened to with some real intentionality. So I think, and then we can continue to sort of work on refining the position while we're doing that, right? To really be able to have a position set up that once we get it in the door, it's going to have that impact. And I think, like, thinking about Rob Kramer, thinking about Maria, if all of a sudden we can start to put pieces around the table where there's more voices speaking up the food chain for this, I think it's going to set us up for better success when we've got other advocates and not just the sustainability people saying we need a sustainability person.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dave, and thanks, Wes, for pushing a little bit on that. I think that was a good conversation. I'm going to keep the update train rolling here and call on myself to give an update from the STARS and STARS kind of peer review working group. So reflecting on the past year for that group, from my end, I think what worked well for us is that we maybe had a slightly clearer outcome in mind from the beginning. It took a couple meetings for us to kind of get a template that we wanted to fill out, but after that, we had a good process. We kind of were able to easily, like, everyone got assigned a credit or two to do some research on and check back in a month. So I think what worked well for us is we had actually a pretty easy outcome that we wanted to get, relatively, compared to, like, rethinking how to address climate change, which is a very different kind of problem than just documenting some shared responses for STARS. So I think that having that kind of focused goal what made it easy on us to show some good progress. In terms of maybe what didn't go well is I think we also, it was a small group of us that kind of worked on it, right? So, and it was a small group of STARS nerds primarily putting it together. So I'm kind of tying into this into what's looking ahead to next year. I'm interested for other people who aren't STARS nerds to get it and use it and test it out and make sure that we just didn't work in our own little bubble and create something that only works for us and doesn't actually work for everyone else. So I think we didn't really take the time, we didn't focus on getting a lot of outside input on it. So I think that's kind of next year to make sure that we didn't go too far astray. I hope we didn't. That was my very quick summary from the STARS group. Is there anyone else from that group that wants to comment or reflect on their work?
Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I would just say that something that I expressed a couple times during our meeting yesterday was not necessarily a failure, but a lack of communication from the STARS gurus on the importance of STARS and how it impacts the rest of campus operations. So I think a goal for us as the STARS working group would be to better find ways to communicate the work that we're doing and to amplify STARS, because it is a massive undertaking that gives a lot of information from a lot of inquiries that we see around campus. So we need to better communicate that those resources are out there for people to seek out that information. And one other thing I was going to say, I'm very proud to be part of the STARS group, and we've gotten a lot done over the last year, but I think it's worth keeping in mind that that working group has kind of been created basically since Alex and I started at Madison. We immediately started bothering STARS people from around the system, and we've been very grateful for that. So it's worth noting that the work's been put in before we really formed the STARS groups.
I'll just add a couple of comments as far as the next steps. I kind of see this working group as really kind of like jettisoning people like John, Jake, and Alex who already have STARS reports in the can, recent STARS reports that they just completed, and bringing into the fold people working on their STARS reports. So it's literally a STARS working group working on STARS. And I think the infrastructure is there to facilitate that. And I also think the nerds can probably turn our attention to the reporting out and storytelling that Jake's alluding to. So I think there's a next level for us if we want to keep going as a group. But then there's also kind of this like ongoing group of people just working on it, so Stephen's points, I'll be working on it in 2021. So there's going to be a core group of people that are kind of actively filling out the new credits and updating these documents as we go. And I think that's really the value that we're going to have for this group moving forward.
I like it. Support group for those going through STARS together.
STARS support group is a great name.
All right. The next working group also maybe had a very definite goal in mind. Jake, you want to talk a little bit about the annual meeting planning group?
Yeah, I would love to. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Alex for being willing to facilitate this session. He was strongly encouraged, voluntold to do so. So I just want to say thanks to Alex. And I guess technically I'm the chair of this committee, but it was by no means a one-man show. I just put meetings on the calendar. So it was a big lift from all of us. And I think what went well, I mean, we're all sitting here and not too many glitches so far. So I think we accomplished what we set out to do. I think it definitely helps that we made the call to make this a virtual event early on. So what didn't go so well, we weren't really able to identify a consistent time to meet. And that was probably a lack of planning on my part, just identifying like, okay, on this 1 month or this one day during the month, we're always going to meet. So there's a little more ad hoc in how we scheduled our meetings. So that was one challenge that we faced. I would say this group is a little different, that the work fluctuates throughout the year. So, we were meeting every 4 to 6 weeks or so up until, a couple months ago, and then it really ramped up. So I know that took a lot of time from myself and the rest of the planning committee. So it's a challenging group to be a part of, but I think it's pretty rewarding. What would I change for next year? Something Missy talked about yesterday is it's important to have continuity in this working group to make sure that the next campus that volunteers to be the one hosting, whether that be in person or virtual next year, has some guidance from folks that have been part of the planning process before. So I think us as a group identifying ways of doing that without making the previous year's group do a whole lot of work, if that makes sense. Just want to make sure that there's some continuity in information. But I welcome my other committee members to hop in here too, because like I said, this was a huge team effort.
I'll just pop on quick. Wes put in the chat, make it in person, totally agree. But in the event that isn't an option, maybe figuring out what technology platforms we can use, just in case, Madison's not in the committee next year and then we lose the online platform. So just figuring out what that platform moving forward could be that doesn't strain one university. Because yeah, Jake had to do everything for virtual, and I know he pulled on Alex a lot, but that's just because none of our universities had like a Zoom with their university.
The other thing that I'll add is I think ideally for this one in particular, we would have liked to have all of the sessions and the schedule and the links and everything sent out way in advance, but there really was a lot that in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks we were pulling together. So I know in other years we've had the conversation of, is fall the right time to do it? As we look forward to next fall, we've got the UMAX conference being hosted at Stevens Point. We're going to have ASHE and then this meeting as well. So I think we need to just continue to have those conversations of how best do we do this? Do we supplement it with more virtual things throughout the year, but then an in-person event on some campus. But again, I think one of the things that I wish we could have done a little differently is just had a little bit more time to finalize things and get it promoted and more information out there, because a lot of that really did come out in the last couple weeks.
Do you feel like you have like a checklist to pass down at this point? Because I don't even know if there was really a checklist.
I feel like Ashley had quite a few notes that she had made. I had made kind of a list of like the logistics when we were planning to host it, physically on our campus, coordinating the rooms and the reservations and the catering and hotels and things like that. So I feel like the pieces are there. We probably just need to put it together a little bit more. When we switched to virtual, of course, a lot of that we just wiped out, and then it was really the sessions, and that's where we lean on this group to kind of advise on what programs we would like to see. So I think we kind of have a checklist, but that's something we can continue to develop and refine going forward.
Awesome. All right. Last one here on the list. Kate, I know you had a chance to talk yesterday about kind of system-wide goals and acknowledge that a little bit of that was on pause this past year while the working groups were working. But is there anything else you want to update on or reflect on that
Yeah,
group?
I think, when you say goals, I feel like I just want to share a little bit. I think this journey started in 2017, especially when I think it was Wes and Amy, Dave, John, and I really started to say, we need new energy goals. We need new commitments from the state. And so that sort of put us on a path of trying to reach 100% renewable energy, a new energy efficiency goal. And I think all of that kind of got really, that idea, that concept has really moved into the recommendations that went to the climate task force. So I think in terms, besides what I talked about yesterday, we keep putting that forward. We keep putting forward that we need to achieve, and we have set high goals for ourselves. And we want that to become part of how the state approaches things. And I think, again, kind of slicing back in Maria, the work we're doing there is going to help that. So just a little sidebar, it's sort of like kind of been, doing the work without realizing you're doing the work. But I feel too, I feel re-energized to restart the group because you helped us yesterday. We're going to continue to battle this political muck of where does our message go and who is listening and how do we get heard higher up, and how do we work with DFDM? How do we work with system better? I really hope there's a day where we have that answer. It's honestly been quite daunting since I started, but yeah, I want to re-energize the group. I feel it's time to sort of sit back and think. It was really a realization that what we put forward as work groups are our goals. So when we sat down and to try and run that group, it was like we need to see what everyone else is working on to really let it take shape. And so I think we'll still continue to do that, but perhaps the group has some new thoughts after this week. So, and I also feel like I did not do well to plan meetings. I just sort of let it take its course. I don't know if that was a good idea or not, and I'm happy to hear what you guys think, but I definitely did not put too much of a focus on it this year.
Kate, I mean, one of the things I think about with that is it might be good to consider for next year, like maybe a quarterly or 3 times in the year, getting those of us, whoever they end up being next year, who are leading working groups together just in a meeting to sort of talk about where we are with our goals and what we're seeing as working groups as sort of issues. And that might, that might be a way then to also keep us updated in annual meetings if we're sort of having that check-in a couple of times during the year, to just sort of see where things are at and if there's any way we can support each other in what we're trying to do.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I was kind of reaching out to the leads on the group just by email, but I like that idea a lot, Dave.
you know, because I don't have enough meetings with you, Jake. So if we could get one more together, that would be really great.
Make it extra long too.
With beer. There'll be happy hour meetings, Dave. How about that?
The ideas flow better with the alcohol.
All right. I don't think I've seen Amy rejoin us, so maybe she is still without internet. So I can just reflect a little bit on the energy stuff and then ask if other folks want to comment quick. I might actually, I feel like I'll echo a lot of kind of what Nathan was saying about his group for the energy benchmarking group. I feel like we had a lot of good conversations and a lot of good kind of sharing of best practices and sharing of projects we're all kind of working on individually around collecting, managing, and kind of sharing energy data on our campus. But I think we struggled with, well, how do we want to bring that together? And we've maybe made a little progress in the past couple months in thinking through testing out some things on shared Power BI opportunities like what Amy's done, and then also the recent grant opportunity from the Office of Energy Innovation as another kind of coalescing opportunity for this group to take a lead on. So I think changing for next year, it might be nice to pick one or two things to really focus on. Maybe those are two things, and show some good, have something to go show some progress on while we continue to have the good conversations. But that's my quick off the top of the head thoughts there. Anyone else want to add?
I mean, Josh, if you want to talk about the grant thing a little bit, in case people aren't familiar, I think that really should be a priority for our group especially. And then, yeah, a lot of the energy measurement stuff is kind of all running on our own campuses in weird different ways, and we're all, you know, it's like it looks different for me now than it did at the beginning of the semester. So there's a lot of flux there, but that grant I think is a really good opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Wes, and thanks, Alex. I'll just chime in briefly on the grant. So this is the Energy Innovation Grant Program that is sponsored by the Office of Energy Innovation at the Public Service Commission. And I can share a brief update too, because I sat in on a webinar yesterday. And the quick update from that webinar yesterday was that it was just more of a general webinar about how to be ready for grants when they come up. The specific webinar for the energy innovation grants will actually be coming up on November 19th. So I did learn something good at the other webinar, and that's that there's a different webinar that's coming up on November 19th, which is really the one that we're going to want to dig into there. And we also have an opportunity to submit questions to the OEI folks on or before November 23rd. Those are some logistics there, but we should probably just take a step back and just make sure that everyone on the call is aware that these grants are sponsored by the Office of Energy Innovation for energy efficiency, renewable energy projects, and comprehensive energy planning. And UW system schools are eligible this round. So if anyone on the call has projects at their campus that they think might be good candidates, you can certainly look into information about these grants. So there's a shared folder on the Google Drive that has a copy of the RFP, as well as some of the background documents, and includes all of the information that people would need to know. Overall, there's $7 million available in this round of funding. And you know, I think there seems like a lot of interest in both from the UW system side in submitting, and then also seems like there's a lot of interest from the OEI side on you know, helping us find something that that makes good sense and that could qualify potentially for a grant. So so that's so there's a group of us that are collecting ideas, and We'll be happy to be a resource for anyone who would like to join our group or just learn more about the grant.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. So I think I might.
This is Rex. I know that there has been conversation relative to specific building energy use intensity work. I noticed Tony's on the call. We've had conversations about that, both from the perspective of our group. Looking at that over the next year, I think that opportunity is something that we want to pursue to potentially have a system-wide, more aggressive goal for our projects. And secondly, it occurs to me that perhaps the grant might be a vehicle that we could investigate to help us set those targets. I'm certainly interested in others' thoughts about it.
Thanks, Rex. And that's actually maybe a pretty good transition to what we want to do here. We're a little behind on schedule, but I think that's okay. So now that we've had the first kind of chance to folks to reflect back on what happened over this past year, I want to talk about a little bit of where we want to go forward for next year. So I'm going to ask Jake to break us off into groups, maybe smallish groups, 4 or 5 folks. I will put a link in the chat before we go to this presentation so people have these questions. Basically, folks give a chance to reflect on what they heard, right? What stood out, and anything that seems to feel like areas where working groups appeared to be effective, or maybe general kind of themes of areas where they fell short. That's maybe a way to get the conversation going in the small groups. The biggest ask of the small group discussion, and to come away with thoughts on other topics we should consider. I know we've talked about what we've done, but there's lots of other things we could. So I've added this list here that I think Kate brought back up of the other working groups we'd considered in the past. So addressing curriculum, addressing our energy sources, specifically focus on grants, one on communication, or one on waste and recycling. So that could be ones we could consider as additional working groups going forward. But what I'm going to ask when we come back from each working group, I'm going to set up a Zoom whiteboard, and hopefully we get that to work. So we're not asking for any one person to read out from your group, but just for folks to type in and start to put out there the different ideas that came up during their conversations. And I'll do my best to kind of organize that. And that'll be the end result of our discussion today. And I'll talk through next steps when we come back. So I'm going to try sharing a whiteboard. So cross your fingers that Zoom works for everyone. Jake, help me if I do this wrong, but everyone should see an opportunity to open up their annotate tools, I think it's called. So maybe you have to find your 3 dots somewhere on your screen, and you should get opportunities where you can start writing text on this whiteboard. And what I'd ask is for people to throw out the working group topics that came up, and I'll do my best to try to group them if there's multiples of the same thing. All right, someone's working, great. Nathan's even figured out the stamping tool.
Writing over myself. It's communication subgroup down in the corner.
I'll move it around.
So it looks like whiteboard isn't working for everyone, Alex. So some
Okay.
people are starting to put things in the chat. So if you just want to keep an eye on that and capture those in later, that would be helpful.
Perfect. Thank you for that. It's hard when I'm sharing to see the chat. Nice. So a couple of ones we had talked about last time, a lot of looks like ideas on communications and perhaps even particular how we communicate what we're doing, whether that's through elevator pitch or kind of impact of our group. Bringing back the waste and surplus, and I think our group also talked about and procurement. And then some new ideas, well, curriculum also, something we had talked about last time. But new ideas around maybe thinking a specific group on new construction and the new DFDM standards, transportation, resiliency planning, renewable energy procurement. So I'm right up on time. I'm going to make sure I get a capture of this. I'm going to stop this for now, and I will check
okay if you
chat
go
as
over
well.
a little bit.
Okay. Thanks, Maria. Well, let me just run through our next steps then. So if you remember what we did last year, we threw all these ideas onto a Google Sheet, and everyone put a check marks next to groups that they would be willing to, put time in over the next year. So we're going to recreate that. We'll set up a new sheet that includes these new ideas as well as the existing working groups. And we ask that everyone take a look and sign up for those working groups that they feel confident that they can donate at least a couple hours a month to working on it. And we'll come back together at our next system call, which I know is not on the calendar, but we'll get on the calendar, but should be the first Tuesday in December, which happens to be the first. And we'll review that and see if we're ready to see which working groups have enough people interested in it to form and who's going to lead them going forward. The other thing I want to say is please re-sign up for working groups you are a part of already, as well as feel comfortable saying, I don't have the time to continue working on this working group that I was on last year. We'll start a blank slate and see where it shakes out. That's all I had. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, one quick comment. John made a point in our breakout I wanted to echo, maybe as an inspirational way to end. So no matter what the outcomes ended up being and how we kind of maybe felt ambiguous about some of the bigger ones, I think the bottom line value for all of us to have a regular conversation around these topics, regardless of what we actually accomplished, was really the main value we got out of it. So John made that point, and I really wanted to echo that and bring it to the larger group, because regardless of what you end up doing with your working groups, just sign up. Get involved in at least one and maybe two, because it was super valuable to do this.